home of a sitting U.S. president. A wall of fencing is now built between the White House and protesters in the wake of George Floyd's death. That wall staying put until June 10th comes as President Trump is sharing a letter from his former lawyer, John Dowd, which refers to protesters as terrorists. I might remind people that a wall like that didn't go up even after 9/11, when there were real terrorists running around this country. I want to bring in former Defense Secretary William Cohen. He's also a former U.S. Senator. Good morning, Secretary Cohen. Always good to have you on. What does it mean for you to hear a sitting president dismissing a whole range of protesters who, in fact, were largely peaceful around the White House, dismissing a whole range of them as terrorists? What does that mean to you?
It means that he has no understanding of what the rule of law really means in this country. He has declared that he wants to be the president of law and order. But that's not what the declaration of this country is. If you go over to the Supreme Court, you see cut in stone. It is equal protection or equality under law, equality under law. So when he says law and order, he's missing something. The word justice has to be there. And that is what people of this country expect when they sign a contract with the U.S. government, that there will be laws, but there'll be justice. And so law and order. I remember a professor of mine years ago saying, liberty without order is a mess, but order without liberty is a menace. And what I see taking place is the White House engaging in very menacing activity and leading us down the trail toward a dictatorship where it is only the law of rule, not the rule of law.
You led the Defense Department, of course. Tell us about the significance of a former Defense Secretary James Mattis, appointed by President Trump, describing the president as mocking the Constitution, but also the sitting Defense Secretary Mark Esper defying the president on his repeated desire to deploy active U.S. military in the U.S. The significance of that public disagreement?
Well, first of all, Jim Mattis, an extraordinary soldier, notwithstanding what the president is trying to demean him by saying he's vastly overrated, one of the most honored and decorated and most admired military men in our history. But the difficulty is, I think there's a code of honor that Jim Mattis and others have always followed, that the commander-in-chief, you serve under him and at his pleasure, and you do so until you receive an illegal order, clearly illegal order, or he does something which strikes at the core of your conscience. And at that point, you have a choice. You can continue to serve him or her or leave. And those are the choices made. Jim Mattis left. He said, I can't serve this any longer, consistent with my own conscience and my duty to my men and women in service. So those are the choices that Secretary of Defense has.
And he did so voluntarily, although the president claimed falsely that he demanded his resignation. Interesting comments, notable, from Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski yesterday. She said this. She said, I felt like perhaps we were getting to a point where we can be more honest with the concerns we might hold internally and have the courage of our own convictions to speak up. She seemed to be referencing concerns among Republican lawmakers, private, not expressed publicly, about this president. Are those concerned Republican lawmakers, in your view, failing their duty, their country, if they're keeping such serious concerns to themselves?
I think there is a dereliction of duty across the board. H.R. McMaster wrote a book back when I was at the Pentagon, and all of us read it, namely that you should never allow the military to become used by politicians for a political objective. And when I signed on with President Clinton, I had an agreement with him. I said, I will do my very best to carry out the duties of this office, and I expect you will never ask me to participate in a political decision or political activity. He said, absolutely. And so to see the military being used for a political purpose, it seems to me that undercuts the very notion that we have a military subservient or subordinate to the commander-in-chief. But the commander-in-chief cannot and should not politicize our military. It is the last institution I'm aware of that he hasn't been able to politicize successfully. He's politicized the Justice Department. He's tried to politicize the judiciary, my judges, my generals, my attorney general. And so now it's my military. It's not. It's not his military, it's the American people's military. And we are sworn to defend the Constitution, not to defend his office. So I find it very offensive that he would use our military to fire rubber bullets or mace or other pepper spray into the eye of innocent people in order to get a photo op. That's not a commander-in-chief. That's a dictator-in-chief.
Retired four-star Marine General John Allen wrote about the president's threat of military force. He said, quote, "It may well signal the beginning of the end of the American experiment." That is quite a jarring statement. And I wonder, given also your concerns about racial division in this country, as demonstrated by Ahmaud Arbery's death, is that how serious the situation is for this country right now?
I think it is serious. I think we are at that tipping point. A former Supreme Court Justice, Brandeis, said that when government becomes a lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for the law. It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy. And so we can't afford to have the government become a lawbreaker. The police who executed George Floyd, Mr. Arbery, those were basically lynchings. Now, my wife 15 years ago was very much involved in going to the United States Senate and begging them, along with her friends, to say, pass a resolution apologizing for the United States Senate failing to condemn lynching, failing to pass laws that prevent lynching. You know what? The Republican majority at that time said, okay, only by a voice vote, only on Monday night. So the members who didn't want to go on record as being opposed to lynching didn't have to be seen. And here we are today, the Senate debating, making lynching a federal crime, and one senator saying, no, it goes too far. These were lynchings that took place in Minneapolis and in Georgia. And we ought to stand up and condemn them, because that is a case of extrajudicial killing. That is murder. Those were lynchings. And the Senate ought to be ashamed if it doesn't pass this law making it a crime.
I should remind our viewers, as they're listening to you, that you were a former Republican senator yourself. Secretary Cohen, thanks very much.